All right, we're going to dive right into one of the biggest, most mind-bending questions ever asked. We're going to unpack a fascinating answer proposed in a work by Diego Sanchez, and we're starting where it all begins, Chapter 0. Let's get into it. I mean, this is the question, right? The one that's kept philosophers and theologians up at night for centuries. If you trace every single thing back to its cause, you eventually hit a wall. So what was that very first domino? And what, or who, gave it the first push?
And you know, this isn't just some random late-night thought. It's a famous philosophical problem, a real paradox known as causal regression. It basically leaves you with two impossible-feeling options. Either there's a chain of causes that goes back literally forever, which is kind of hard to wrap your head around, or there was a first cause that just appeared, out of nowhere, with no cause itself. But how can something come from nothing? That's the exact paradox this idea sets out to solve.
So how do we get around it? Well, the proposed solution is pretty radical. It suggests that maybe we've been asking the wrong question all along. Instead of trying to figure out what came before God, the key is to completely redefine what God is. This brings us to the central concept from Chapter 0, something called the eternity first cause. Now, try not to think of this as a being, at least not yet. Think of it as the absolute ground floor of reality, a self-existing substance that was just always there. And it's from this substance that God generates himself. So you see, God doesn't just come from eternity.
He is eternity. And that, right there, is the key to this whole argument. It's not about a God who appears out of the eternal void. The idea is that God is the infinite, uncaused foundation of all being. He doesn't create the foundation, he is the foundation. Okay, so let's walk through the logic here. It really breaks down into 4 steps. 1, the ultimate foundation for everything has to be something uncreated, right? That's the eternity first cause. 2, God's identity isn't separate from this foundation, he is it. 3, and this is where it gets really interesting, this foundation actually has a physical form, infinite empty space. And that leads directly to step 4. Creation, then, isn't making something from nothing. It's God generating reality from his own substance. I know, that's a pretty abstract idea. So to make it a little more concrete, the author gives us this really powerful analogy. For just a minute, forget the image of a creator standing apart from his creation. Instead, just picture a vast, infinite ocean that has always existed.
And this quote from Chapter 0 just nails it. God isn't some separate being floating in this ocean of eternity. He is the ocean, the eternal substance itself that awakens and becomes self-aware. And from that consciousness, he then generates all the waves and currents and life that we see as creation.
Okay, so if God is the ocean, that leads to a pretty big question. What is the water actually made of? What is the fundamental substance of reality in this framework? Well, this is where the argument really starts to challenge a very old, very traditional idea about creation.
For thousands of years, the dominant idea in theology has been creation ex nihilo. That's Latin for creation from nothing. But this author suggests that if God is generating everything from his own substance, well, that changes the entire game.
So let's put them side by side. On the one hand, you have ex nihilo, where the universe appears out of a total void. And on the other, you have this thesis of ex deo, which means from God, where the universe is actually an unfolding of God's own being.
Now, the author argues that this idea of creation ex deo isn't just a philosophical preference. He says it's actually rooted in a very specific interpretation of Scripture, a rereading of a really famous verse. This is the verse right here. The argument is that when Scripture says the visible world was not made of what is visible, it doesn't necessarily mean it was made from nothing. It could mean it was made from a real substance that is simply invisible to us. So what is that invisible substance?
And this might be the most mind-bending part of the entire theory. The physical form of God's substance, that primordial, cosmic ocean, is the infinite empty space that surrounds all of us. In this view, the vacuum of space isn't nothingness, it's the fullness of divine potential.
Okay, so let's pause for a second. We've gone from a logical paradox to a cosmic ocean made of empty space. This all feels really abstract, right? But the author's goal isn't just cosmology. He brings this entire concept down to a deeply, deeply personal level.
So why does any of this matter? What's the point? The argument is that if we actually exist within this divine substance, then our connection to God isn't just a matter of faith or belief. It's a fundamental fact of our existence.
This quote is reframed to be seen as a literal participation in the divine. We aren't separate from that ocean. We literally live and move and have our being within it. Every action, every thought happens within the very substance of God. We are each, as the author puts it, living inside a point of eternity.
And to help us perceive this reality, the claim is we've been given two tools. First, there's the lamp of the Lord, which is our enlightened reason, our ability to follow logic all the way back to its source. And second is the seed of eternity, that innate, deep yearning we all have for meaning. The argument is that we feel that because eternity is literally in our hearts.
So we end up with a totally new perspective on that first question. If this theory is true, then the empty space in the room around you right now, it isn't nothing. It's the very substance of the first cause. So how does that change the way you see the world and your own place within it? It's a pretty profound thought to end on.